Hi, I'm Jen Sutherland, CEO of Beyond School, and with me today is Lea Jenn, our COO. And we're here to talk to you this morning a little bit about the future of education and where we see this whole thing going in the era of COVID and beyond. So even before COVID, the education system was broken. A framework built to serve an era of the Industrial Revolution has just proven itself woefully inadequate to preparing people for the real world of work and life as we know it. This spring, when COVID hit and ground the wheels of the educational establishment to a halt, the failures and limitations of that school system were thrown into the spotlight, and people who had never before considered it started to ask, is there a better way? And we believe that there is, but before we can step forward, we have to take a step back and take a look at the history of education and how we got here. So often, when people will convene to talk about education, they're limited to a framework that has constrained the last few generations of students, but our modern systems of education are only the most recent development in this experiment of mass schooling. So over this long arc of human history, people were most often socialized and educated within family and community groups with a heavy emphasis on the practical skills that they would need to succeed and build upon the success of their predecessors. Before the 19th century, education was highly individualized, it was specific, it was organized locally. The system wasn't equitable, and it wasn't suited to the explosion of technology and progress of the Industrial Revolution. And it was limited to the knowledge that was available within a community. So the big win of mass schooling, from the way I see it, was the preparation of a homogenous workforce with the skills adequate to the technological leap of the Industrial Revolution. The education system fueled the industrial and economic explosion. Public schools, for the first time, created a ladder for advancement that hadn't previously existed for people. But while that world of technology and education continued to evolve forward, the education system became a sloth in a world of cheetahs. So what we're left with, this system that we have, is not adequately preparing kids for the world that exists as it is now. It's preparing them for a world that has passed into history. And the millennials and Gen Z generation are living examples of that struggle in early adulthood, when it becomes clear that the social compact that the educational system you were raised in just isn't going to deliver once you hit the real world. So today we're finding ourselves in this world where public education and most versions of mass schooling are, with the really best of intentions, failing the students that they have a mandate to serve. So what schools teach and how they teach has failed to keep pace with this growing and changing world and the communities that we live in now.
And I think we've really seen that. I think what COVID has done is massively highlighted the inadequacies. So it's highlighted the inequalities, it's highlighted the inequities, it's highlighted quite how fast technological change has happened, and that the education system just hasn't been able to keep up at all. And so what we're seeing now is that we have students who are coming through the system but are completely unprepared for the world that we are now living in, largely at the moment due to COVID. So we've got, the massive and rapid explosion of remote work, and the fact that we are all suddenly thrust into working from home, that we don't have managers looking over our shoulders, that we have to be much more self-starters. We have all of these kind of I suppose, additional requirements and skills that we are now needing to demonstrate, and the education system just, particularly in the last 6 months, cannot keep up.
No, and from my perspective, rather than trying to fix education, we're at a point in history where reimagining it from the ground up is both a possible and a promising solution, maybe for the first time in, well, centuries.
Yeah, and I think if we can see COVID almost as that opportunity, it's given us this, it's like, let's press pause, let's press stop, let's have this opportunity to really look at what's working and reimagine it from the ground up, where we don't actually have to try and fix something that just isn't working. We can, literally build it back up again.
Right. So, the fundamental question to ask then is, what is the purpose of education in this modern era?
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this before. It isn't even in this modern era. It's what is the purpose of education, and it's that question has always been fundamental to whatever system you're trying to create at whatever time for whatever purpose.
Yeah, and from where we sit now, it's certainly not to download a particular content block of academic knowledge to a student. Everything we need is at our fingertips. We can Google anything we want. We can ask Siri through the magic of the internet. So what should we be teaching? What is the purpose of education in a post-industrial world? And those are questions that are not being asked widely enough or quickly enough, at any rate.
And I
And
think the answers are still, we talk a lot, we talk about skills, and we talk about the kind of, I suppose, the very specific job specific skills, but we talk a lot about the macro skills and those kind of higher level skills which equip our children and us as adults to function and thrive in a world where it's skill based, it's not kind of content and knowledge based.
Right. And, I see 6 core pillars around which we build any kind of education. It doesn't really matter what you're training to do. And those 6 pillars are critical thinking, which is vital, practical skills for whatever the thing is that you need to do, philosophical reasoning, because without some sense of how the world goes together and your ability to think and reason through it, you're going to struggle. Humanity, and that's an interesting one. We could talk for hours just about that one. Self-management, productivity, your ability to regulate yourself emotionally, getting the best out of yourself. The management of self is something that's woefully lacking in many educations. And then finally, the really important one is how to learn. That's what young people need to learn these days, not whether or not, it's not about whether they can quote the same passage of Shakespeare or manipulate formulas or even code in the most recent language. How to learn is the key. So that path forward, as I see it, is in equipping young people and older people with the mental, emotional, and social skills required to manipulate any body of knowledge that they choose to learn as they move forward. And also to help individuals view themselves as part of this collective that we all live in.
Yeah, totally. And it's being able to find the knowledge, find it, manipulate it, apply it practically. And it isn't about the knowledge and the content itself. It's about what we do with that. And we have got so many tools, and particularly with technology, we've got so much at our disposal these days. And it's about the skills of knowing how to use them, what's available, and applying them in real world ways which help solve the problems that are kind of fundamental to our survival, I guess, in many cases.
Totally. And rather than school being this training ground for real world education becomes something that's happening in the world. So instead of these contrived lessons focused on clearing a particular imaginary hurdle, standardized tests, we shift towards this meaningful, project-based, outcomes-oriented form of learning and measurement that allows people to participate in the world, solve problems that actually exist, not wait for some magical start date of their adult lives to participate, and is much more encouraging and inspiring than being locked into a system that says, oh, well, wait now until you can contribute. Why do we do that? Let's contribute now as we're learning.
Yeah, totally. And one of our kind of tenets at Beyond School is that kind happens everywhere, anywhere, at every age, and it doesn't stop when you leave school. It doesn't stop when you leave university. We're big proponents of kind of whole family education, or whole family learning, as we call it. And that is that, we as adults have just as much to learn and to continue to learn as our kids do. And we can learn from our kids, and we can learn from each other, and we can learn from, kind of everywhere and anywhere.
Totally. So in terms of what this looks like, this new model of education in the future, I think we have to look at it from several perspectives. So for adult learners, maybe this means a self-forged path towards career change or a refocus in the post-COVID work world. And, a couple of years ago, Google and Apple announced that they were no longer going to require a college degree for new hires. And to me, that was so the handwriting on the wall for the established educational system. It was clearly not preparing people adequately for the tech giants and the people who were charging forward. So, and for parents, maybe this means stepping into the driver's seat of your children's education in a way that you haven't before, and co-creating unique and hybrid paths that are neither locked into the framework of a system that's not serving us any longer, nor are they the stereotypical Lone Ranger homeschooling type model, but instead they create a totally unique world-class education for your child where you're deciding who is teaching what, when, where, and how, but you're not necessarily required to be the end all be all
Yeah,
for your.
I think that's probably one of the hurdles that many parents think is that, it's, do I have to be a teacher? Do I have to know everything about science and maths? Oh, look, I really don't. Oh my goodness, I can't do this. And, you have an educational background. I don't. I'm not a teacher. I've homeschooled my kids from the beginning. My oldest is 11. And, I've been very much a facilitator as opposed to a teacher. And it's, we as the parents don't need to be the teachers, but we also don't need to be outsourcing the kind of creation and the development of our kids' education to somewhere else and somebody else. And it kind of, hands off, it's, let's just leave it to them, because that isn't working anymore. And, certainly through COVID, I think what we're finding and what we're seeing is that, parents are taking greater control of their kids' education again, and they're no longer outsourcing it, and they're kind of taking back control and looking at what's available and going, let's create this hybrid solution. Let's look at what's there and let's put something together that actually works for our individual children.
Yeah, and that doesn't necessarily mean removing them from school. It just means getting real about what your kids actually need to be prepared for the future, and acknowledging that each of these systems has its limitations and that the path forward is probably somewhere in the middle, beyond that, beyond school. For the educational establishments, this was going to require a paradigm shift and a practice that moves away from things that have always been considered tried and true methods of education, and an openness to reimagining what modern education in a real world structure could look like. And the sooner the better. And I think this is the one that's going to be tough. And this is why we're focusing our efforts on individuals and families and parents, is that frameworks and big structures that are political and in some ways global are hard to change. Yeah, they just don't move forward fast enough. So, in summary, at Beyond School, what we're building is the school of the future. We're partnering with world-class subject matter experts and encouraging self-directed learners to forge these paths that are as individual and inspiring as they are. There's a framework where educators can innovate and iterate, and they're free from the shackles of this outmoded system. And we're creating collaborative learning environments where learning is happening everywhere. And it's happening always. And it's happening in the real world for now and for the future.
Beyond school.